Howdy, y'all, and welcome to the EEARSS podcast produced by Terrier TV. I am Alligator Robb, joined as always by Cindy and Bill. Howdy, y'all. How's it going?
Undecided so far.
As
I'll let
you guys stare back and forth at each other trying to figure who's going to talk.
I'm good. Well, I was trying to figure out who would go first. Being a gentleman, you know.
Yep.
You should.
So before we get started, let me give a huge shout out to Edna Wilson with Celebrate Remax Aerospace for sponsoring our program. Edna and her team love Titusville and the Space Coast, and they are dedicated to helping their town thrive. They know buying or selling a home is a really big deal. I always mess up the word deal for some reason. People are like, "Are you talking about pickles?" No, like, no, I'm talking about a deal. They promise to help you make home ownership dreams come true. Visit ednawilson.com. Yeah, so
There
awesome.
we go.
Yeah, I don't know. I just can't get the word deal out properly. Just something about that. So me and Cindy hung out over last week, over spring break.
Oh, wow. Okay.
A couple of times. One time was nice, and other times were a couple of tough times, which we'll talk about in a second. But,
yeah.
We got to go to a Solar Bears game with the whole Cindy family, which was pretty epic.
Oh, did you? The whole thing?
The
Solar
whole
Bears?
thing.
Oh, I love the Solar Bears. Way back in the day. I haven't been in a long time.
I think
Me and Maddie both derive way too much enjoyment during hockey when they start fighting. I don't. Something visceral comes over both of us, and we're like, yeah, I don't understand. We are two of the most passive people in the entire world.
Right.
that was
Not when
probably
it comes to hockey.
the least amount of fighting I've ever seen in a Solar Bears game. I think I watched
Really?
one other one once before, and I want to say like half a team got kicked out.
Well, I'll tell you this. In hockey, the later you go in the season, the less fights there are. Because, you know, they're getting ready for the playoffs, that kind of thing. And there's more of that. And they've already felt each other out, and everybody knows these are the guys that you can't mess with. Because that's what a lot of the fights are about, just enforcement.
And then again, after talking to Dr. Patel, I still can't believe that's not the sport that people lose the most amount of
I know.
teeth.
We saw somebody lose a tooth.
Indeed, we did. We watched a guy lose at least a tooth, if not like a whole bunch of teeth. But you got a pucker right in the
Solar
mouth.
Bear game in the 90s, I watched a guy lose an eye.
Oh, God.
Oh, it was terrible.
I think
Wow.
I enjoy sporting events more than anybody else in the place because I don't care who wins. So I get super excited and cheer for both teams, and then everyone hates me. Everyone's like, whose side are you on? I don't care.
That's funny.
See, you have to pick a side.
No, I don't.
do.
I have no personal investment. I have nothing to lose.
So, I want to take a second here and try to hold it together while I talk about this. There was a previous guest of ours that's been on here. Her name was Amanda. She's been a long-term friend of mine for a very long time. She passed away last week. Huge loss to, not just her friends and family, but she had been such a wonderful steward and kind of foundation for so many people around not just the state and not just the country, but around the world, I'm finding out, with her blogs and things she was doing. I've had people reach out to me on Instagram that were friends with her from Japan and stuff. All over the place, and talking about the relationship they had with her and what a big support she was to them and the things that they were going through, and how they would go back and forth, and they'd be a support group for one another. And she'd been battling for about 3 years with stage 4 melanoma, and a lot of people in that place choose a different path than what she chose. She chose the path to kind of stand up and just be a huge, bright, shining light to a lot of people going through a lot of rough things. And man, she's going to be greatly missed by a lot of people. That's so, definitely going to miss Amanda. But anyhow, I felt like we needed to talk about it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
She was the kind of person that no matter how often you had met her, whether it was once, whether it was every day, she left a mark on your life.
Yep.
And when the community and the world loses somebody like that, it's hard. And the older I get, I've learned in life not to say things like, oh, well, everything happens for a reason. I don't believe stuff like that anymore. But I can say that for those of us that knew Amanda and were blessed to know Amanda.
Yeah, I'm having the same trouble.
Yeah.
Yep.
She dedicated the last years of her life to making sure she did everything she could to teach people about how to protect themselves
Yep.
and how to be aware. And that's what we can do now. We can continue to honor her and share that. This is Florida. Take sun protection seriously. Take your health seriously.
Yeah, I know.
Sorry. I think last spring break she was out in the breezeway.
Yep.
Giving out sunscreen to the kids before they left on break, just, and talking to them and telling them, that it's serious business.
Yeah. In a couple conversations I've had with her mom since then, I believe they're going to continue what she had going on. And, I want to find a way through the EcoFest event we do to allow them to do some more stuff about that. So I don't know. I hope to be able to talk to them about this in the coming couple of weeks and see what we can work out. And I'm not a rich guy, but I have a lot of other blessings through things like this that we do, and a lot of media stuff. So maybe we can figure out a way to help them out. But anyhow, yeah, it's a lot. So you guys ready to jump in and talking to our guest today?
Yes, let's do it.
Okay, today on the phone we are joined by Dr. Ossiboff. We'll call him. Are we going to call him Dr. Oz? Or are we not going to call him Dr. Oz?
Just call him Oz, man. That's what
okay, we'll call him Oz.
Just call him Oz.
What's up, Oz? How's it going, buddy?
I'm well. How are you?
Pretty good. So you were with the Zoological Medicine Diagnostic Laboratory with the University of Florida, yes?
Yeah, so that's one of the, at the University of Florida, I work with the Zoological Medicine Diagnostic Laboratory. I'm a clinical associate professor, and I'm also the director of the Aquatic, Amphibian, and Reptile Pathology Program.
That's a lot of things. That's a lot of hats inside of one giant hat.
I really feel like an underachiever right now hearing all that.
So the first time me and you chatted was maybe a few months ago now, after one of the alligator trappers up in the Gainesville area had came across a very sick alligator, and myself and one of the game wardens down here found a way to connect you with him, and then we've been chatting ever since.
Yeah,
you were telling me a little bit about your journey, which is, of course, every journey starts in a very similar place, it seems like. You're from Chicago originally.
So I'm actually from New Jersey originally.
New Jersey, okay.
But New Jersey originally, but from New Jersey, I went to Chicago for undergrad.
Okay.
So I did my undergrad training at Loyola Chicago, and then started a very long training journey before I ended up in Florida. That took me to Ithaca, New York, for Cornell University, New York City for the Wildlife Conservation Society. Briefly back again in Chicago with the Zoological Pathology Program at the University of Illinois. And then I started at University of Florida in 2017.
Holy moly, buddy. That's a journey and a half.
Yeah.
So that entire time, have you been specialized on zoonotic diseases, basically, in reptiles, or did you kind of jump back and forth?
Well, so, I think with most people, their journey, kind of gets more refined as they go through. If you would have asked me when I was, in undergraduate of what I'd be doing today, I would think you were crazy. But as I kind of did my training, I went to veterinary school knowing that I wanted to help animals, but I didn't feel that being a general practitioner helping dogs and cats was my pathway. And then while I was in vet school, I got exposed to infectious disease research. And so I actually stepped away from vet school for several years to complete my PhD studying virus infections. Went back to vet school and really decided at that time that I wanted to focus on better understanding diseases of some of the less known species. And always had a strong interest and attachment to reptiles and amphibians. And so I knew, I always had that as kind of like a side interest. I never thought I would make it my professional focus. But I realized I had the unique opportunity to kind of combine all of my talents to study diseases of reptiles and amphibians. And since we know so little about those diseases, I really wanted to be comfortable with diagnosing the disease in the animal and knowing when I should be looking for a certain infectious agent, be it a virus, a bacteria, or a parasite. So that's kind of what took me down the road of anatomic pathology, where I do animal necropsies and look at lots of tissues under the microscope. And so in my current job, all those hats I wear is just combining all of those different parts of my training to hopefully make an impact on the health of wild and captive reptiles and amphibians.
So I know this. We go back to a quick second to this alligator that was up there in the Gainesville area. You were telling me when you were doing the necropsy on this thing, before you started finding anything, there were some symptoms, right? That alligator was kind of acting weird. He was twitchy. He was doing a lot of weird things. And
yeah, so very, very neurologic, as we would refer to it.
Okay, so you have an animal like that that's doing that. What are your first steps? What series of things do you do in order to find out what's going on?
With a wild animal like this that is debilitated and really, we don't know what's wrong, and it doesn't have a high chance of having a high quality of life. One of the first things that we really recommend is a post-mortem examination, is to look at all of the tissues. Whenever you have an animal that's showing signs of its in its brain or its spinal cord, when you do the exam on that animal, you need to remove the brain and spinal cord, which is not exactly an easy feat for a crocodilian. They've got a thick skull for a reason, and getting to the brain can be a little bit of a challenge, but this wasn't a huge gator. So and then the next thing is really look at everything under the microscope. What changes are present in all the different tissues to suggest what might be going on.
Okay. And so on that one in particular, you told me you found lesions along his spinal cord or in his brain, or both?
Both. Yeah, so this animal had really severe inflammation of the brain, and it was kind of throughout every section of the brain we looked at had really severe inflammation, and that inflammation extended down along the spinal cord. And we can sometimes get an idea of what's causing the inflammation by the type of cells present in the inflammatory infiltrate. And the cells in this alligator were very suggestive that it was a viral infection.
Wow. And so you told me that so after doing some testing, you were able to kind of narrow that down too, right?
Yeah. So whenever you're testing for viruses, you have to determine, is it a virus that you know about, or is it something that hasn't been characterized before? And so that's where the pathology part comes in, is that there are typical tissue responses in the CNS of animals in response to certain pathogens. And so we don't know anywhere near as much about free-ranging crocodilians as we do some of the other species, but we know that they can get West Nile virus. So West Nile virus was on a differential list, or one of the things we would consider, but this didn't look anything like West Nile virus.
And West Nile is usually more common in the farm system, I think, too, than the wild gators too, right?
It is more common in terms of causing more severe disease, but there have been a couple of recent studies. That was kind of quiet for many years. There was actually one that came out just last year where they are doing research again and showing that it's likely that the American alligators in the wild are serving as a reservoir for the West Nile. They just probably aren't presenting with much in the way of clinical lesions. And so this gator had, it was really severe changes in the brain, the spinal cord. So when you have a suspect target, but you don't know what you're looking for, that's when you kind of have to turn to the newer molecular techniques. And so in collaboration with another professor at the college, we did next generation sequencing, which essentially amplifies all of the nucleic acids in a sample. And the top signal in the next generation sequencing was an entirely new virus for alligators.
Wow. That's very, very neat. So, I mean, it's very neat, of course, to find something new in the scientific world. But so you're pretty much, for those that are following along here, you're like a detective, basically. You're a hardcore, high-end scientific detective and figuring these things out. This leads to this.
Yeah, it's like reptile CSI is essentially what goes on.
No joke. This leads me to so many other questions, because I know you were saying this particular virus that you found has been kind of jumping over from snake populations. Yes.
Well, so we're not sure. This virus is a really different virus, and it's one of the types of virus that has only been documented recently in kind of the boom of these next generation sequencing modalities. And so in the past 10, 15 years, there's been a big, explosion of data as it relates to metagenomic sampling or sequencing. And that's when you just take samples from everywhere, do this next generation sequencing analysis, and then you analyze everything. And so they've done it with seawater, they've done it with soil. And when I say they, I'm just talking scientists worldwide, and it's really expanded our understanding of different diseases, different species, all these things that we could never really detect before. And so these viruses started getting picked up in these metagenomic analyses, and in a lot of invertebrates, so a lot of different insects and even some crustaceans, but they'd never been associated really with disease in vertebrate hosts. And so this alligator was interesting because we had this chew virus, which is the type of virus, was present in the brain of this alligator, and it was causing inflammation. And I think one of the most surprising things is that when we found this, I am collaborating with another group of researchers who have characterized related viruses in the same family in free-ranging turtles in the southeastern U.S., a freshwater turtle species and 2 marine turtle species. So these could be important viruses of wild reptiles that until now just haven't really been characterized.
So I wonder if there was any correlation between that and whatever was going on here with the freshwater turtles up and down the St. Johns River chain for a while that were all dying, or was that a whole something different?
So that was I was involved with some of that work as well. So that's a different virus that again was a novel detection in those softshell turtles, as well as some cooters and a couple other species. It is still going on. FWC is still working and getting samples, but that was a virus that has been called turtle Fraser virus, and it's that virus is actually so different that when we did the original analysis of some of the samples, we didn't get any hits to the virus because it was so different than anything that had ever been documented. And then later sample analysis showed that it actually was related to a couple of fish viruses, and then more detailed work really showed that it was its own important virus. This is one of the things that's really helping us do these disease investigations in wildlife, is the increased access to these high throughput molecular techniques that have become much more affordable. It's not cheap, but it's within reach for a lot of these disease investigations.
So this brings me back to something me and you talked about a long time ago. It's almost like having a bunch of different cell cultures going on of a bunch of different things, and kind of knowing what to look for, or being able to have a basis of things to go off of.
Yep.
Are you
absolutely?
Is this going to be a more and more common thing, you think, finding viruses in one place and seeing them jump into new hosts, to total new species, or is this a common thing that's been going on forever, or just does it seem like it's new?
It's not new, and it probably hasn't been going on forever either. I would say that we don't have as much of the understanding of the timeline of things, but if you start thinking about the big emerging infectious diseases of wildlife, we're not limiting ourselves to just reptiles and amphibians. There's some great examples in those species, but if you think about the amphibian chytrid fungi, the ones that have caused widespread declines in frogs around the world. If you think about the fungus that has caused declines in bats in North America, causing the disease white nose syndrome. Snake fungal disease, the one that's spreading around snakes throughout the U.S., and then a handful of other diseases. Yeah, I think that the movement of these pathogens globally, as humans have started moving everything else globally, trade items, ships, water that's just in the ballasts of ships, as we have started to globalize the planet, we've also been moving diseases around, as well as the species that carry the diseases, to new places. And whenever you introduce new pathogens to closely or moderately related species, you always have the potential for pathogen spillover into those hosts. And when you think about let's say a parasite, and then a species of frog that has normally lived alongside the parasite for millennia, right? I mean, there is a natural process of selection between the immune response of the frog and the defense mechanisms of the parasite, and they eventually kind of are able to cohabitate. The parasite doesn't want to cause severe disease in the frog, because if it kills the frog, it has nowhere to live. And the frog is able to deal with the parasite in a way that doesn't damage its own tissues. If you take a completely new parasite and move it to a related frog, that interaction doesn't exist. And because of that, we are seeing the chytrid fungus in frogs was really the first example, an instance where infectious diseases can drive their hosts to the status of being threatened or even extinct in the wild because of the interaction of the host and the disease.
That's, again, awesome and terrifying at the same time. Yeah. So I would say then, by what you're describing there, species that are exotic species to an area being introduced, Florida's got to be a hot spot for all this stuff going on right now, right?
I love the winter. I love fall. I love snow. The reason that I am in Florida is because of the invasive species, the diseases, and the reptiles here. Yeah, so Florida, for better or worse, is a huge hot spot for this right now.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's so many things that have moved up here to the Space Coast where we're at now, versus that used to be just, down there in the tip of Florida. I mean, there's a breeding group of tegus here in Brevard County now. It's insanity. There's we have veiled chameleons, we have Jackson's chameleons. I mean, what
was it that you had on the show?
Oh, that was a veiled. Yeah, that was crossing the road on the way here. That was night anoles, you name it. They're all in Brevard, and these are things that, until not too long ago, you could only find those in South Florida. And 30 years ago, there wasn't hardly any of them in South Florida, and now they're everywhere. So this is something. Do you think it's a mix of that and just, I mean, it's got to be a mix of everything, right? It's got to be all the species together. Maybe their immune system is being a little bit lower due to whatever's going on. Maybe less habitat, pollution, global warming, probably name all the things being put together, making kind of the perfect storm of it all happen at the same time, right? To make things be able to jump between so easily.
Yeah, absolutely. And not only even the jump, just the things, when we talk about disease in animals or humans, disease is the interaction of the pathogen, the host, and the environment. It's called the epidemiologic triad. And disease only happens when the right scenario of those three occurs. And as you mentioned, all the anthropogenic influences, all of the habitat destruction, and then couple that with the changes in climate and pollution, and you're adding stress to the system, and you're adding new pathogens to the system and new species. So yes, it is not a great time out there as it relates to disease transmission.
So what concern is there to people, living in the area now? I mean, things like this take a long time to be able to get from one species to a next, I would think. But with all the kind of perfect storm we have going on here, is there a concern for people that are living in the southeast United States of something like this jumping over to a person?
So it's unlikely for that for that big of a jump to happen. There are a number of barriers that exist to allow a pathogen to move from one host to an extremely different host. And so if we use the SARS epidemic as an example, or pandemic as an example, depending on the day and the prevailing theory, I do believe that there's a very high likelihood that this was a transmission event of a virus from an animal species that changed and was able to spill over into humans. Those types of spillover events most commonly happen between mammals. And so a jump, particularly for a virus from either a bird or a reptile, would be harder, though the current spread of high path avian influenza throughout the world is incredibly concerning. And that virus has made some jumps from birds to mammals, including humans. There's just been limited transmission from mammal to mammal or human to human. So that's kind of what's prevented it from becoming a giant deal. In general, I think that there's not a huge risk to people living in the Southeast as it relates to these diseases moving between animals, particularly some of the lower vertebrates, as they're sometimes referred to, those diseases getting into humans. The bigger concern, and I think the thing that everyone really should be thinking about when we talk about these diseases, are the unseen side effects of what happens when these diseases change the relative populations of these species in the environment, and what indirect effects that can have on human health. That's where our concern should be. So there have been a couple of studies that have shown this, but a recent study showed that with the spread of chytrid fungus through Central and South America, decreased number of tadpoles eating fewer mosquito larvae actually would likely result in higher malaria transmission and spread amongst humans. There was a small study. No, there was a small study in the Northeast, and these are just the complex interactions in biology that I don't think everyone thinks of right off the way. But there was a small study in the Northeast as it relates to snake fungal disease and crotalids, the timber rattlesnakes in the Northeast. So they modeled that if the timber rattlesnake populations in the Northeast decrease, the mouse populations in the Northeast will increase. And mice are carriers of Borrelia burgdorferi, which is the causative agent of Lyme disease. And therefore, a snake fungus could cause an increase in the number of human Lyme disease cases because of the complex interactions of all of these different species in the ecosystem.
That is what I wish people understood more, that nothing exists by itself. There are ripple effects for everything. When people say, "Oh, well, what does it matter if this, bug species is endangered?" It all matters. Everything matters. Nothing exists in isolation.
Yeah, there's a effect there that just goes on and on and on. And yeah, any kind of, man, I get. It's a daily thing where I'm trying to explain to people the importance of reptiles and amphibians and just wildlife in general. And then when you start breaking it down like that, where you're like, well, yeah, there's fewer tadpoles here due to this certain cause, which are letting in more, it's letting the malaria virus spread at will, or whatever virus it might be that greatly affects the human population. You kind of go, oh, now I get it. Oh, now I see. Yeah. Now I see what's going on here. Yeah, well, yeah. Come on, that's a giant scale of something that happens on a bunch of microscopic levels to get there. So, man, I want to say this has probably been one of the most informative podcasts I think we've done in a long time. We've had a lot of awesome guests, Oz, but this has been something else, buddy. This is epic.
Great.
So
it's a scary podcast. It's a scary podcast.
People could let it scare them if they want to. It's scary awesome is what it is. So you were telling me right now there's a few specific types of species that you're looking at in regards, like you're specifically looking hard at, that are kind of traveling around Florida?
Yeah, so we're looking at a couple of things that are, of concern to us, and that may become bigger issues in Florida. And these are things that you want to kind of keep your eye out for and not miss. One of them is we were receiving some information from citizens around the St. Petersburg area that brown anoles that were in the area were really thin and looked incredibly abnormal. And these anoles had these kind of masses present on their face or their tail. And so we were able to coordinate to have one of these animals submitted for necropsy, and we looked at it. And the masses on those anoles were large aggregates of bacteria that were eating away the bone and the muscle of the brown anoles, the invasive brown anoles. And this was a really unique appearance, and we we did some molecular work to figure it out, and we identified the organism, the bacteria that was causing it. And that bacteria had only ever been described once elsewhere in the world, a few years before, and that place was nowhere near Florida. And in the location where that thing was. So you told me to create 5 trivia questions, and I did. And
yeah.
This was one of the trivia questions. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to give it away, but the the location of the bacterium that originally occurred was on a tiny island in the Indian Ocean called Christmas Island. And so Christmas Island is a territory of Australia, and Christmas Island has historically had issues with invasive gecko species and invasive lizards driving their few native species to, driving their numbers down. And then all of a sudden, this bacteria pops up. And this bacteria caused widespread declines in the native reptiles, which are all lizards, on this tiny island in the Indian Ocean. And somehow, this bacterium popped up in St. Petersburg, Florida, and we don't know how. It has, there's a couple of reports of a similar looking bacteria. One is in a Polish veterinary conference from the 1970s. The other is in a paper from animals, house geckos that were imported from Singapore in the 1990s. Unfortunately, there's no samples of any of those cases for us to confirm that it's the same bacteria. But this is a bacteria that causes really extensive damage. And, the concern isn't the brown anoles, right? The brown anoles, they're
Right.
here, but they're not supposed to be here. But the concern is what happens if this bacterium then spreads to the native species. And of particular concern is the native green anole, because that 1970s conference proceeding from Poland, the bacteria that looks similar to what we're seeing in the anoles in the St. Petersburg area was noted in a captive collection of lizards that, believe it or not, included a green anole. And that green anole got the disease due to this bacteria. And so we are actively trying to determine if this poses a risk for more reptiles in the state of Florida. And though it's unlikely, given what we know about this bacteria, this specific bacteria, this group of bacteria, the Enterococcus bacteria, are a major cause of bacterial diseases that humans get when they're in the hospital.
Yep.
So these nosocomial infections. And the one thing that's crazy about this Enterococcus in this lizard is that there's almost no inflammatory response to it whatsoever. That means that this bacteria, it produces this thick capsule that protects it from even inciting an inflammatory response, which is the normal response to whenever you have this type of infection. This bacteria is able to evade it. And so
biofilm.
Yep, exactly. They have that strong biofilm, and that is, when you look at the slides of this, the first thing that pops through my mind is, wow, I really do hope that this never makes its way into humans, because this is going to be an absolute disaster. And then I start worrying about the health of the native reptiles. But that is one of the big ones. And again, we don't know how it got here. Florida is a hotbed for these types of things for a couple of reasons. One is we have the environmental conditions that can allow for a lot of these pathogens to kind of persist. We also have the environmental conditions that allow for introduced species to really take a foothold and become established.
Yeah, we have a very nice subtropical climate, don't we?
Yes. And so, that kind of, like you mentioned before, it sets up the perfect storm of opportunity for these things to occur.
So I don't exactly remember the answer to this, so I'm going to ask you real quick. Are there bacteria that are specifically like almost designed for only certain species that can't jump species as easily as a virus? Or can bacteria just kind of go wherever they want to?
Bacteria have less in the way of restriction about moving between different species than, say, a virus does. But there is usually some degree well, not usually, sometimes some degree of a localization to certain species. There are clear bacteria that completely disregard that. Salmonella is a good one. But salmonella is an interesting example because, everyone who's ever had a reptile as a pet has always been warned about salmonella. And the salmonella in the reptiles does nothing. It's part of their normal flora, but if it gets to us, that's when it causes problems. And that happens with other bacteria as well. So it's not free range for the bacteria. They can't do whatever they want to whoever they want, but there are a lot fewer restrictions than, say, for a virus.
Yeah, we're always telling people not to wash their turtles in the sink and then eat out of the same bowl. It's kind of a bad idea.
Yeah.
Or pet your pet lizard and pick your nose. Yep. Wash your hands, then pick your nose if you're a nose picker. You know what I mean? It's a pretty important thing. This has been amazing. So I gave you a little bit of homework. We were talking about that. Let's jump into it.
I'm excited
right.
for this trivia.
This is
right.
I'm telling you.
This is how we met.
but-
We met in microbiology.
This is true. Okay, before we jump into that real quick, if people are in the St. Petersburg area and they see a lizard that has a knot on its tail or a knot in its face, something like that going on, who do they contact about that? Who do they call? Who do they talk to?
I mean, they can definitely contact me. There's not that many people with my last name, so if you search my last name, my UF faculty page comes up, and my email is right there. So contacting me, we have been working closely with FWC on this. FWC has had, as I think happens pretty frequently, they've had a number of personnel changes. So some of the people that we were working with this on in FWC have moved on to other places. So I don't want it to seem like I'm having people contact me because I don't want our FWC colleagues to get in. It's just if they contact me, then I can put them in touch with the most appropriate people at the time in FWC, and we're kind of working together to identify this.
I say they just hired a new exotic species guy, I believe. I think is Joshua Sands, I think. Something like that.
Oh, I haven't had a chance to meet him yet. That's great.
I chatted with him the other day about something. I forget what it was, but so that you're right. They've been hiring a lot of new people. Now, you guys are also, is it your lab that's working on the Jesus lizards?
No, we're not. That's another lab at UF that's doing some of the
Okay.
basilisk work.
Yeah, basilisks. So their technical name is a basilisk, but there's green and browns. And they're the lizards. They're a big lizard that can run across water, so they call them a Jesus lizard. Bill and Cindy are looking at me like I'm crazy, so I'm trying to break this down for them.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, we have those in Brevard too, over
What?
by the locks out there at the port. I saw those there with my brother maybe 10 years ago.
Oh, okay.
They've been there for a long time out there at Port Canaveral. And I never really thought about it, like other than going, there you go, one more weird lizard. There we go. Pretty cool. I like lizards, so I'm kind of like, check it out, pretty neat. Actually, my brother saw it before I did, so yeah. But anyhow, sorry. Now we can jump into it, sir.
All right. So we briefly mentioned snake fungal disease. So snake fungal disease is the disease that we're seeing in in free-ranging rattlesnakes and other colubrid species in North America. So what is the earliest documentation of snake fungal disease in North America? The decade and the state.
Oh, that's a great question. Man, I would say it's probably out west. No, maybe it's Texas.
1940s Alabama.
1920s
That's really close.
Arizona.
Yeah, I'd imagine it's somewhere in the west or Texas, I would guess. And I'd say it's
Well,
probably
no, because fungal thing is more
Alabama,
in the humid,
Louisiana,
yeah,
some
the humid
something
climate, I would think.
southeast, maybe us.
I'm still saying Texas, but
Okay.
I'm gonna go. I'll say the 30s.
Okay, so it's 1940s. It was 1945, and it is us. It is the state of Florida.
Wow.
And
okay.
so
Okay.
snake fungal disease was first recognized as a true disease affecting snakes in North America right around between 2008 2010. And that was up in Illinois and the Northeast in Massasauga and timber rattlesnake populations. And then as the research went on, we better understood that it was predominantly in the eastern half of the United States and has been spreading west. And a recent retrospective looking at historical specimens in museums showed that it actually has been present in the U.S. As early as 1945, and that it was a scarlet snake from Florida that was positive. And there has been a question of again, where did it come from? Genetic analysis of all of the Ophidiomyces or all of the fungi that cause snake fungal disease in North America suggests it was introduced here at one point. And so it's not something that likely has been here for a long time. It was an introduced pathogen most likely, and that then started to spread in the United States.
So is it because snakes refuse to wear shower shoes? And so that's how it gets spread?
Snakes wearing shower
I think
shoes.
we've gotten to the bottom of it.
Let's say if a snake could wear a shower hat, I could understand that, but shower shoes kind of goes away from the point.
Wow,
Unless you're talking about a glass lizard. Maybe
One
one
long
time
shoe?
maybe glass lizards maybe one
Well,
time in
that-
the past wore shoes.
There we go.
There you go.
I don't
All right,
know.
yeah.
When you start talking about fungus, all I'm thinking about is athlete's foot. I'm sorry. That's where I am. Okay?
Good Lord, Bill. All right. Well, I think we all successfully failed that one. So
Yes.
All
Yes,
right.
we did. Spectacular.
Yeah, let's go to number 2.
All right, so we're going to talk about another invasive disease, and this is one that's called rat lungworm. And it's called rat lungworm because it's normally found in the lungs of rats, but it is a nasty worm that can get into the central nervous system of mammals, including humans, and end up in your brain.
Yep.
And so frogs have recently been documented to potentially serve as paratenic or intermediate hosts to harbor this parasite. And in Hawaii, it's been identified as the Puerto Rican coqui frog. Which frog in Florida has been identified as the host for this parasite?
There's a real bad one in slugs too, is there not?
Yes.
Yeah,
And snails.
it's the same parasite you can get from slugs and frogs.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was gonna say I thought it was in
Yeah.
slugs as well.
Is it
There
the
was a kid
Cuban
down here
tree
that ate
frog?
one. I bet you it is a Cuban tree frog.
It is the Cuban tree frog.
Ooh,
Yeah.
score one for
So
Cindy.
again, the importance of what invasive species can do in addition to eating all the other frogs around and everything that the frogs eat
And
is
everything.
they can be a host for parasites that can affect other species, including humans.
Good job, Cindy.
I remember that from research way back, way back when.
Remember when Cuban tree frogs were first showing up here in Florida? It must have been right out of high school where everybody started to really notice them. And I have a buddy who him and his family are all Cuban. And I was telling him about Cuban tree frogs, and he thought for sure I was making fun of him. I'm like, no, buddy, there's a legit thing. I'm not making some bad, inappropriate joke. They're a real thing. I'm not making something up. But, oh, Lord, that's good job, Cindy. All right, on to number 3.
All right, so we're going to do an anatomy question. So crocodilians such as the American alligator have some unique anatomical features. And so one of the unique features they have that I think a lot of people know about is that they have a heart that has 4 chambers. So their heart is kind of the intermediate between a reptile and a bird. And so they have the most developed of the hearts of reptiles. But they also have one other structure/organ present in their coelomic cavity, which is what we call the body cavity of a reptile, that's not present in any other reptiles, but that you can find a correlate of in mammals.
It's an appendix. No, it's not. I know that. That's the only thing I can think of. I'm sorry.
What do you got, Cindy?
I'm going to be wrong. Gallbladder?
Not a gallbladder. Good guess, though.
Come on,
I
Frank.
don't know
Tell
why
us.
a gator would have a gallbladder.
Well, I can think of a
Crocodilians.
couple of things, but
Well,
I always go to the whole gizzard thing, but where they carry their gastroliths and stuff. But
Right.
I don't know. What I'm not sure. I'm not exactly sure which one you're speaking of, so I'm gonna let you go to it.
So they have a pseudodiaphragm. And so mammals, a diaphragm, is the important structure that divides your abdomen from your thoracic cavity and assists in respiration. And it's absent in all reptiles, amphibians, birds, fish. Everything lower than a mammal lacks a diaphragm. But crocodilians have evolved a structure that kind of has a similar function to the diaphragm in mammals, though it's not composed of muscle. It's composed of fibrous connective tissue that is actually separates their coelomic cavity into a pseudo-abdomen and a pseudothorax, and is involved a little bit in how they respire, but not as much as a muscular diaphragm that you would find in a mammal.
Okay, so I can tell you I've done thousands and thousands of necropsies on crocodilians, and I've never honestly thought of that. If
You
that
know
makes
how
any
when you're
sense.
doing a necropsy on an alligator and it's such a pain in the butt around the liver,
Yeah.
because there's all of that connect, that's their pseudodiaphragm. Yeah, so that's essentially what breaks their coelomic cavity into a component. And that means they can also isolate infectious diseases to either around their lungs or in the caudal part of their coelomic cavity. That's not possible for other reptiles, birds, and fish and everything else.
Okay. So yeah, I remember hearing a fellow named Lou Gillette explain that part of about the viruses and the bacteria once before in that area, but I had never heard that described, the diaphragm described that way. That's pretty awesome. Yeah, there's very few things that I have not dug into on alligators or crocodilians, and that's one
I love that
never
you
heard
just
of.
stumped Frank.
Yeah, that was good. That was really good. That was really good. All right, we got one more.
All right. So one thing that we didn't talk about is there is an invasive parasite in Florida reptiles that is called Rhylotiella orientalis, or the oriental lungworm. And it is a pentastome parasite, which is a really odd group of parasites that affect the lungs and also sometimes other parts of the body. But these parasites came in with the invasive Burmese pythons. And so the parasite is a normal infection in Burmese pythons in Asia. And when the Burmese pythons were released, they brought the parasite with them, and the parasite has continued to proliferate within the pythons, but now also, unfortunately, in our native snake and lizard species as well. So, how far north has the parasite made its way in the state of Florida? County.
Oh, I would say, that's an interesting question. If I had to make a guess, it's probably just below us. I'd say
Indian River?
Yeah, Indian River County, probably, or just south of that,
St.
somewhere
Lucie?
around the Paynes Prairie area down there.
Mm-hmm.
So that'd be a guess. I don't know. No, Paynes Prairie is in
So-
Gainesville. I'm
Yeah,
losing my
that's
mind. Good Lord.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of different prairie. I don't know what I'm losing my mind for. Cindy, you got one?
You sh-
Cindy's
I'm
thinking
gonna
about it.
say Brevard Volusia.
No, I think it's south of us. I mean, you could be 100%
No,
right.
I'm
but
not.
I'm saying
I'm not right.
I think it's south of us. I'd say the West Palm area, somewhere around there, or just south, like
I'm going to say Martin County.
Martin County.
Yeah, that's what, because it's kind of in between all that.
Okay. All right. What do you got?
So the scary part is that we've documented all the way up here in Alachua County.
Whoa.
And so this parasite is rapidly moving in native species. And the weird thing about these parasites is that they need to infect intermediate hosts, which then have to be eaten by the final host to complete their life cycle. And normally when you have those types of parasites, their ability to cause disease and move in a geographic area outside of their normal host is usually very limited. But these nasty little parasites are able to infect both native toads as well as brown anoles. The studies haven't been done on green anoles, but they probably can affect green anoles as well. And then those are eaten either by snakes or other larger lizards. And yeah, we found it in a wild water snake, a wild Nerodia here in Alachua County 2 years ago. And so that's a huge jump, obviously, from the invasive range of the Burmese python. So a lot of people are on high alert about this parasite and what it could mean for the native reptile species. The concerning thing is that the parasites in the Burmese python, which is a giant snake, stay very, very small. But it seems when these parasites are able to infect these normal hosts, the native species we have here in Florida, the parasites get much, much bigger. And that means that they're drinking more of the blood from the animals they're infecting, resulting in anemia, immunosuppression, and then other diseases. And so this parasite has done a number on pygmy rattlesnakes in Central Florida, and we find the parasites commonly in conjunction with snake fungal disease and or other parasitic infections, even viral diseases. So there's a lot of concern about how far this parasite could spread in the southeast. I mean, if you think it's jumped the climate zones all the way up now to Gainesville, that doesn't stop it much from going into southern Georgia or Alabama, and who knows potentially how much farther it could get.
That's terrifying. Yeah, that's the only word I can come up with. That's terrifying. Wow.
Yeah.
My mind has been officially blown over and over again. So this has been one of the really more, I don't even know.
Very educational.
I want to say fun-filled, but at the same, I'm a little bit terrified to say fun-filled.
To me, it was a lot of new stuff.
Yeah, this was great. This was great. Thank you so much for being on here with us. We really, really appreciate it. If people want to find,
thank you for having me,
more about your lab and the work you're doing, where can they go to find that?
Most of it is, I wish I could give you an easy URL, but I'm not good with that. I'm not good with social media. Most of our stuff is all on the University of Florida College of Veterinary Medicine web pages. And again, most of it you can find just by Googling my last name. That's probably the easiest way. But there's links to our lab, the different work that we do, the types of projects, the types of things that we're looking into. And I live for this stuff. So if anyone ever has interesting questions or sick reptiles in the wild and they don't know what's going on, shoot me an email. I'm usually pretty good about responding to emails. But yeah, I really appreciate you all having me on.
Yeah, this has been epic, buddy. I hope we can get you down here in the field with us soon to go out and do some reptile work.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you're always welcome anywhere I'm at, buddy. It's honestly a pleasure to be speaking with you for sure.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking with all of you.
All right, Oz, have a great day, buddy.
Thanks, you too.
All right, Bill, Cindy, that was man, that
Amazing.
I said, that was awesome, terrific, terrifying,
Just
all
a lot
the
of
same time.
information. Just a lot of information.
That guy
I have so much I'm going to be
he's a
Googling.
genius. He's a genius
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
that world.
Oh, yeah.
The first conversation I had with him, I went, man, we've got to get you on our podcast just to have a conversation with you, because they were so, just in like we had a 15-minute conversation. I'm going, man, people need to know this stuff and what's going on. Let me try to help you get this information out there, because there's so many things going on. I mean, that's a whole bunch of different things happening at the same time that people need to know about.
Yeah, absolutely.
But all right, let's call it a show. What do you say?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, guys. Thank you for tuning in. Super appreciate you all. You can find the EEARSS podcast on all platforms by searching EEARSS. EEARSS. We'll catch you all next time. Bye-bye.